case? What is that big picture? Whereas theory is what gets that attention. What is that lasting impression about this case? Theory, so you're having that roadmap. If you're going to explain to someone how to get somewhere, you want to be able to give the detailed instructions. My wife is from Jamaica, and we go and her parents still live there, and so we go and we travel there quite often. And one time we were trying to get from one city from where she lives to another city that she had never been to. And so we were driving, and we stopped, and we were lost. I had no idea where to go. And so her brother was driving us, and he pulled over, and there was a gentleman walking down the road, and he said, he rolled down his window, how do we get there? And he said, you go that way, and you go that way, and you go this way. and to me, it's like, I have no idea what he just said, in the sense where I needed specific details on where to go. It was just kind of, you go here, you go there, you go here. And there wasn't any details on where exactly to go. And I think sometimes when we're presenting a case, sometimes we get into the situation where a lot of times we're saying, you go here, you go there, and you go here, without having those details. And so when we have a theory, we want to be able to outline those details. We want to create a roadmap of what those details are within the case. A lot of times when I'm looking at how to create my theory, the first place I'm going to look to is the charging document or the information. And I'm going to look at what are the elements of this offense. What do I need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt? A lot of times when I'm presenting a case at a trial, when you talk about proof of beyond a reasonable doubt, it's not about every single aspect of that case, but it's regarding the elements of the offense. So it doesn't matter if someone was wearing blue pants or black pants or brown pants. We don't need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But what we have to prove, let's say in a murder case, is premeditation. That they thought about this crime before they committed it. And so maybe the color of the pants, we don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but we prove that specific element. So when I'm looking at a theory of a case, I'm looking at how to build that roadmap according to the elements that I have to prove. And then once I develop that roadmap, it gives me a pretty good idea how I want it to approach this case. Theme is to convey to the judges how you want them to feel about this case. Why is this case important? Why are we taking everyone's time to present this case? Why is this case important enough that someone is going to be looking to be held criminally accountable? Why is this case important that a judge should rule in our favor? And so we should have some type of concise statement or idea that we can convey to the judge why this case is important, why they should care about it, why they shouldn't be thinking about lunch or about golfing or about whatever they want to do or how they want to go take a nap or eat, that they see that it's important because you believe it's important as well. So your theme is going to help you to develop why that case is important. And it's going to be portrayed or conveyed throughout the presentation of that case. So it's something that you want to have constantly being brought up. There's studies that have found that we learn through repetition. So if you're told something once, you might remember it. It's kind of like your mom when she says, told you once, but if I tell you twice, you better never do that again. You know, and it's the same thing. If we repeat something, that's going to stick in our heads. So we learn through repetition, and so we want to keep repeating that theme over and over. We want it to be a continual, where we bring it up at the beginning. We want to gear our direct examination towards that theme, and then we want to tailor our closings to that theme as well. And so then that judge is going to hear over and over, this is what this case is about. And so when that judge is deciding what ultimately the verdict should be, that's going to be repeating in that judge's head. That repetition is going to be there. So we like to focus on that theme that is going to be throughout the whole proceeding. Just going back to the theory, again, we're talking about that roadmap. Another thing about theory is it helps us to prevent being distracted. So the opposing counsel, they're going to want to take you off into areas that are on that roadmap. They want you to go over there when you want to go over here. And so you want to avoid those distractions. In the United States, and I don't know if this is a term used everywhere, but we call those red herrings. So basically, it's a distraction that trying to get you off topic, and then identify what that roadmap is, and then what is an important aspect of this case. I'm going to give you some examples of a theory and then a theme. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the case that you're going to be dealing with, the Castro case. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as theory and theme. And the example actually applies to this Castro case. The theory of the case, the defendant shot and killed his wife because he mistakenly believed his wife was having an affair. So this is very similar to what you're going to see in Castro. So that's your roadmap. So you're going to look at, okay, what do I need to prove? I need to prove that the defendant killed someone and that they intentionally killed someone. So it's just not, well, his wife died because she slipped and fell on the floor. That's not murder, or that's not homicide. We have to prove that there was an intentional act of this defendant, that he caused the death of this person. So this is your roadmap of saying, okay, this is what I want to prove throughout this case. And then your theme is kind of that important idea. Jealousy is a dangerous companion. Jealousy drove him to murder. And that's the thing you want to repeat. You don't have to repeat it in words, but you repeat that idea. So you're going to constantly talk about the jealousy, that he was enraged because of this jealousy. He was so enraged that he killed his wife. And you repeat that throughout your presentation of the case. So what is that most important idea? That is what you're looking at when you're crafting and using a theme. What is the single most powerful thought you want the judges to have while listening to that evidence? And then you craft your theme from that. So what do you want that lasting impression? If there's one thing you could take away from this, what would that be? What is that thing when that judge goes home at night that he's going to wake up in the middle of the night thinking about. That's you want to convey that theme. You also want to make sure that when you decide on a theme, that it's not something that could be used against you by the defense. Taking the jealousy example, if it's premeditation, in the United States, there's different degrees of murder. First degree murder involves premeditation. Second degree murder is usually a situation where someone acts out of rage, where they didn't think about this beforehand, but because of a situation, they acted out of rage. And the law treats those separately. The law says the person that thinks about doing something ahead of time and that plans is more culpable than a person that just got upset and acted out of anger or because they were upset. So, with that theme of jealousy, if it's a premeditated first-degree murder situation, that's something where maybe the defense could go back and say, this wasn't premeditated. This is a situation where the defendant learned about this affair, this alleged affair, and then acted out of anger without thinking and killed his wife. And that might be the difference in the United States between the death penalty and life in prison. And so you want to be careful when you're thinking about your theme, that's something that won't be used against you. So you have to be kind of careful in crafting that. And again, you repeat this over and over. Stick with that theme throughout. It helps you to avoid going off on paths that you don't want to go down. Avoid those red herrings. So you want to be able to incorporate it and then hammer it home during the closing argument. Even when you're preparing your direct examination, you're thinking about that theme. Okay, how can I get that idea out as I'm asking this witness questions? Here's some additional examples of a theme. The victim lived a nightmare in the nightmare. So you're conveying to the judge, this was such a horrible situation for this victim. It was a nightmare. They had to live every minute of their lives in this horrible nightmare. And it's your opportunity to end that, Your Honor. Child abuse. To be given the affection of a child is sacred. A sacred privilege. The defendant violated that sacred privilege. See that powerful statement right there. Something that the judge is going to remember, that this person, this defendant, violated that sacred privilege. That they had this amazing opportunity to have children, and they violated that privilege given to them by abusing their child. Child molestation. Let no evil befall a child. Protect this child from evil. Accomplice. He who helps the guilty shares the crime. The defendant shares the crime. So you have an accomplice situation where I always like to look at bank robberies are the easiest accomplice situation, where you have someone, you have a driver of the car that knows they're going to go rob a bank. And even though they might not go inside that bank and actually pull out a gun and demand money, the fact that they knew what was going on and that they were a means to accomplishing that feat of robbing the bank, that they should be held accountable as well. And so that's kind of an example of some themes. Let's go over a few more. Domestic violence, where a victim recants. The law protects both the willing and the unwilling equally. Use the law and protect this victim. So having a situation where a witness comes forward, reports a situation to law enforcement, and then the case is charged, and now they don't want to go forward with it after all. And so you might have a situation where you're going to go forward with that, even though they're not willing to still come and testify. And so you're going to want to convey why this is still important, even though the victim doesn't want to come testify. And you can explain to the judge reasons why a victim may not testify at certain times. Where intent is an issue, acts demonstrate the intention. The evidence of the defendant's acts demonstrate his intention. So again, we're talking about in a first-degree murder case where we're talking about intent. Where I use that example of it was a jealous rage. Well, we could look back at the evidence and look at items of evidence that show intent. The person bought a gun 4 days before the killing took place. The person was conversing with a friend saying how angry he was and that he was going to do something about it. Those are going to be things that show that intent. And so you want to be able to have that theme and then gear your evidence and see how that evidence fits to corroborate that theme. And again, the best place to do this is at the beginning of the case. That way you have an idea of what this evidence is, and then you can kind of take that evidence and gear it towards that. Where credibility of the state's witnesses is the issue. Personal attacks are the tool of those without truth. See the truth, not the attacks. So I had a case. It was a drug prosecution, and it was essentially a law enforcement officer pulled the individual that was driving over. The individual got out of his car and threw the drugs up in the air, and it ended up hitting the law enforcement officer, the police officer, in the foot. He actually got hit by the drugs that the defendant threw. And so he picked up the drugs, of course, and they were processed, and they came back as being drugs. And so we went to trial on that case. And the only defense that they could come up with is that the officer, a couple times in his report, misspelled a couple words. And so they tried to say, well, how can you trust this officer if he can't spell correctly? And so my theme in my closing ended up being, it doesn't matter how you spell it. No people that are selling drugs, I like to become an informant or a source. And one of the individuals that she said that she could buy drugs from was her best friend. And so she ended up buying drugs from her best friend on 3 occasions. And it ended up being a situation where we went to trial on that case. The defendant refused to take a plea agreement. And I knew that I was going to want to use, or the issue that was going to come up was that they were friends. And so my theory of the case was that the defendant was selling drugs, that she sold drugs on 3 separate occasions to an undercover or to an informant who was put there by law enforcement. And that law enforcement in the background was watching these transactions. So that's my overall theory of the case. But what I wanted is to convey some type of theme that would be that lasting impression. My theme for that case was, in drugs, in the world of drugs, all is fair in love and drugs. So kind of that theme of love and war, that basically anything goes when it's love and war, anything goes when it's love or drugs. And that because this is that world, she's willing to rat on her friend, essentially, but that's the way that road works. And that she had to know someone, or that she knew how this road works. And so that was the theme that was conveyed throughout that trial. And that was repeated over and over. And it was something, so then when the defense tried to bring that up later, it was something where we had already diffused it, because we used it as our theme. That they were going to say, well, she sold to her you know, she set her friend up. But we had already diffused that by using that as our theme. Another case that I had was an individual that she faked having cancer. She wanted the state to pay for a pregnancy termination or abortion. And the state would only pay for those in certain situations where the life of the mother is affected or there's danger to the child. And so she faked having cancer in order for the state to pay for this. And I knew going into this, that's a hot topic issue. That's a very political issue. People have very strong thoughts on this issue. And so I wanted to talk about not so much the procedure that this defendant obtained, but to go back and focus on that she was a con artist, essentially. So I needed to prove, my theory was that she came up with a lie, her lie being cancer. So my elements were what to say. If she's talking to her boyfriend, she knew what to say.